guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel Ships in Port. Today we tell about effect of COVID in shipping. COVID is least deadly disease in known history of merchant shipping. Manager of bulk carrier Turtons, CSL Europe, a division of Canada's CSL Group, said in its statement that CSL Europe regrets to confirm the death, from COVID-related cardiac arrest, of a captain on board the self-unloading bulk carrier Turtons, near Bergen, Norway. In a post-mortem test, the captain tested positive for COVID-19, although the infection was unknown prior to his death, added the company. Let's analyze this death narrative with regards to relation to COVID. Do we know the age of Master? No, we don't. Do we know his pre-existing condition or lack of it? No, we don't. But we may assume from company's statement, that by the time of cardiac arrest he was not sick, the infection was unknown prior to his death. So his tragic death bears all the marks of common cardiac arrest, without any hints or symptoms of anything COVID-related, except wildly unreliable PCR test, which, post-mortem, happened to be positive. Norwegian media in its news covering the tragic death of Turtons' master, repeatedly said, that medics can't confirm the relation between the death and positive PCR test. Even more alarming is the fact, that in all the news and Norwegian media I managed to find, especially initial ones, there was no mentioning of cardiac arrest. Is death from heart attack so difficult to diagnose? Since when? Or was it just one more case of COVID death, when authorities and media had to hide the facts until medics would manage somehow, to tie the death to COVID? So, for all we know and facts we have, death from COVID-related cardiac arrest, meaning from COVID, seems to be highly doubtful. Norwegian bulk carrier captain died and tested positive after death, insanity unleashed. Self-discharging bulk carrier Turtons asked for medical assistance northwest of Stavanger on February 24 while en route from Gulen, Norway to Dover, UK. Helicopter transferred 2 medics on board of bulk carrier, to assist sick crew, captain of the ship, but he unfortunately, died. The ship was diverted to Stavanger, arriving there on February 25. Deceased captain tested positive for virus, albeit post-mortem. All 18 Filipino crew, understood except captain, were tested twice since arrival, 7 tested positive, all 7 being in good health without any symptoms of anything. Of course, they've been all tested by a notoriously unreliable PCR test. Norwegian health authorities didn't specify the cause of captain's death, saying only, that they can't confirm death was caused by COVID. All the crew are isolated on board, being under quarantine. Medics who boarded the ship are also under quarantine. Pilots who boarded the ship last 6 times are also under quarantine. And finally, for good measure, funeral agency staff, and captain's relatives attending funeral, were also quarantined. Why don't Norway quarantine all ships in all its ports, and all planes which were in Norway airspace at the time of an accident? To stay on the safe side, you know. Like NZ does. Absolute insanity. P.S. There is no known to me confirmed case of seaman death on board caused by virus, since the time pandemic started last year. Self-discharging bulk carrier Turtons, IMO 8315554, DWT 11546, built 1985, flag Bahamas, manager CSL Norway as. This continuation of Turtons' tragic accident story, together with CSL statement excerpts, was published by Trade Winds. What makes the whole story utmost important, is just one phrase Trade Winds added. The incident is believed to be the first known case of a COVID-19 related fatality on a merchant ship. COVID-19 confirmed as cause of death of CSL bulker master. Norwegian post-mortem reveals master suffered COVID-related cardiac arrest. CSL Europe has confirmed that the master of a self-unloading bulker died of a COVID-19 related cardiac arrest as the ship sailed near Bergen, Norway. The infection was discovered in a post-mortem test. Later tests also found 11 other seafarers on board the company's 11,500 DWT Turtons, built 1985, were infected with the virus but have only shown mild symptoms so far. The crew will remain in isolation on the vessel at the port of Stavanger for the next 10 days. CSL Europe regrets to confirm the death, from COVID-related cardiac arrest, of a captain on board the self-unloading bulk carrier Turtons, near Bergen, Norway, the company, a division of Canada's CSL Group, said. In a post-mortem test, the captain tested positive for COVID-19, although the infection was unknown prior to his death. The vessel was en route from Gulen in Norway to Dover in the UK when the captain suffered health problems in international waters on 24 February. The ship, which has a crew of 18 Filipinos, diverted to the Randaberg region near Stavanger following the captain's death. The incident is believed to be the first known case of a COVID-19-related fatality on a merchant ship. CSL Europe said it is offering full support to the crew currently under quarantine. Ongoing support is being provided to the seafarers whose comfort and well-being is of paramount importance, the company said. CSL is in constant contact with the quarantined crew members to ensure they are able to communicate regularly with their families and have what they need to remain healthy and in good spirits under the circumstances. CSL Europe said it had strict protocols in place to stop the spread of COVID-19 among its crew. Crews are required to undergo a mandatory COVID-19 PCR test in their home country and must quarantine until a negative result is confirmed. A further 14 days quarantine is required on arrival in Europe before traveling in a sterilized vehicle to the company's ships. CSL Europe said it believes that strict pre-boarding protocols had been followed in the case of the Turtons. The owner is now investigating the incident with health authorities and the vessel's ship manager, V.Ships, to determine the cause of transmission. CSL is deeply saddened by the loss of the captain and extends its heartfelt condolences to his family, the company said. The health and safety of all seafarers remain CSL's first priority. I've been repeatedly saying in my articles that we don't know any confirmed case of COVID-caused death on board of any ship of World Merchant Fleet, during all the time of pandemic insanity since Jan-February last year. My memory and brains work like your quantum computer or AI, better, I believe. It collects and keeps all important data on important and long-term perspective issues, and when the time comes, gives out the result. No COVID-related deaths on board of the ships. Now I am not alone, I'm joined by Trade Winds, which, I assume, was also collecting and processing data on COVID-related cases on board of cargo ships. More than a year passed since mankind was occupied by fighting pandemic regime, and there's still, not one, confirmed beyond reasonable doubt, COVID-related death case in all of World Merchant Fleet. At least 1.5 million seamen were and are deployed on board of cargo ships during this period, in closed spaces, in conditions ideal for outbreak of contagious disease, and no deaths are reported. WHO, WEF, EU, UN, infamous Imperial College and Bill Gates himself, promised us a deadly virus, a plague mankind didn't ever experience. Tens of millions of deaths. Be it anywhere near the reality, we'd have hundreds of deaths on board of the ships. We still have none, because, I repeat, Turton's case in this respect, is not confirmed in a way it should be confirmed. I trust Norwegian health, or any nation's, for that matter, authorities, no more than I trust Bill Gates, or MSM, or WHO, or Chinese Communist Party. Health organizations, whether international or national, devastated their credibility during this pandemic, razed it to the ground. Voodoo stuff is more reliable than the BS they're telling us. Okay, where does it leave shipping, cruise, and cruise change crisis? Even if we accept Turton's death as COVID-related death, it gives us a 1 to 1.5 million chance of dying from COVID on board of merchant ships. It means, for all intents and purposes, that COVID pandemic is least dangerous, let alone mortal, disease, ever known in shipping history. Hundreds die on board of the ships annually, from heart attacks, from cancer, from other diseases, but none, or one unconfirmed, from COVID. All the restrictions and barriers which grind to a halt normal crew change practices, must be lifted, immediately. There's no other logical, sensible, sane conclusion, drawn from merchant marine COVID-related death statistics. Will the barriers be lifted? Of course not. Read the hysterical statements issued by some of maritime bodies, and especially, by trade unions. They're too deep in this worldwide crime against humanity, to acknowledge the truth and back out. Listen to national and international so-called authorities, commanders and chief of occupation forces, and stop being naive. Our authorities and media aren't that bad, many people say all throughout the world. You're right, they aren't that bad. They're much worse, they're evil or collude with evil. It's high time, folks, to fundamentally reset your thinking, your perception and understanding of the reality we live in now. We are living under occupation, and we're, all the humanity, occupied by absolutely hostile and deadly forces, whose main aim is to exterminate the majority of us. Listen to Gates and WEF leaders, read Rockefeller reports and works of Obama's science advisor. There are tons of open, published materials revealing their true agenda and goals. Their regime is absolutely illegal, their pandemic, climate change laws and regulations are unlawful and criminal, so in order to survive and get our freedom back, we must respond and behave respectively, by resisting and fighting. Just like our forefathers did when their homelands were invaded by aggressors. Either we resist, or we die, some sooner, some later, some painfully, some quickly. So-called elites, including shipping elites, are no exemption. Read the history, elite idiots. P.S. Tradewinds did a great job by writing and publishing Turton's story, and specifically, by acknowledging the fact that COVID isn't a deadly pandemic, albeit not stating it directly. In our times of increasing censorship and persecution of all dissidents, of all those who contradict official narrative, simple act of publishing a fact becomes an act of courage. Thank you, Tradewinds. I somehow got a feeling that the Tradewinds threw the story as a bait, hoping I'll take it. Many thanks, I took it, well appreciated. Stuck at Sea, How to Save the World's Seafarers and the Supply Systems They Support. Global action is being urged to stop a humanitarian crisis unfolding at sea. Crew changes on merchant ships have been stopped for months, putting those on board at risk of depression and injury. Industry leaders are calling for stranded seafarers to be recognized as key workers, have visas waived and given access to flights to return home. Supply systems and the global economic recovery are also at stake, as shipping is the lifeblood of the global economy, transporting 90% of global trade. Clapping for essential workers on suburban streets cannot be heard at sea, where hundreds of thousands of crew members are stranded on ships they can't leave, risking their lives to put food on our plates. Our complex global supply system would grind to a halt without them, as merchant ships transport about 90% of global trade by volume, from food and medical goods, to energy and raw materials. In 2018, world seaborne trade volumes rose to an all-time high of 11 billion tons. But as the pandemic continues, the mental health and safety of crews are under threat, imperiling the global economic recovery from COVID-19, according to a growing swell of leaders and organizations, including the World Economic Forum. Meetings of the International Maritime Organization, IMO, the International Labour Organization, ILO, heads of business, government ministers and workers' representatives will begin on June 22 to chart a way through the crisis. At the heart of the gathering will be a call for urgent action to rescue these forgotten essential workers, who have been working much longer than their contracts usually allow. Serving those who serve us. Since the coronavirus crisis began, as many as 1 in 6 of the 1 million crew on 60,000 cargo ships at sea have been marooned. Crew changes were suspended in March as a short-term solution to avoid disruption to the supply system. The men and women still working on board are unable to disembark, with border closures, grounded aircraft and travel restrictions all preventing them from returning to their home country and families. And they don't know when they will. The transport industry's imperative is keeping people safe, while keeping food and other goods moving in service to society, says Margie Van Gogh, the forum's head of supply chain and transport industries, also coordinating the industry action group with a cohort of CEOs. Cohesive action at a global level is needed to keep fatigued seafarers safe, protecting the lives and livelihoods of these men and women who keep the fragile, interconnected global supply system functioning is the best way we can now serve those who serve us, said Van Gogh. The plight of seafarers has become a humanitarian and safety crisis, said UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, calling on countries to repatriate their citizens. Facilitating seafarer repatriations and crew changes needs immediate attention, echoes Bud Dar, Executive Vice President, Maritime Policy and Government Affairs of global cruise and container shipping firm MSC Group. All involved governments must give full effect to the recent call of the UN Secretary-General to alleviate the hardship on these heroes of the transportation world and their families, and to avoid the possibility of disruptions in trade. Cabin fever. Paul Laursen, the chief technical officer of Maersk, the world's largest container shipping company, told CNN more than a third of the 6,600 seafarers currently at sea have been serving well above their normal contract length. Fatigue and issues with mental health are increasing. For safety, regulatory and humanitarian reasons, crew changes cannot be postponed indefinitely. Some seafarers have been on board for more than a year, according to Dave Heindel, the International Transport Workers Federation, ITF, Seafarers Section Chair. Many have been prevented by governments from coming ashore even for a walk and in some cases, he says, refused emergency medical care. In April, it took a joined-up response from the ITF, the International Labour Organization, ILO, and the International Maritime Organization's Seafarer Crisis Action Team, tasked with monitoring, coordination and support, to save the life of a 45-year-old Russian seafarer who was having a stroke, after repeated requests from the cargo ship to enter port were refused. One container ship officer anonymously told the BBC, "Morale is quite low, especially because you can't go out to shore and, without that, by definition it's cabin fever. You have had to make, and are continuing to make, many sacrifices," said Pope Francis in a recent video message of solidarity. Long periods spent aboard ships without being able to disembark, separation from families, friends and native countries, fear of infection, all these things are a heavy burden to bear, now more than ever. Lives and livelihoods. As of mid-June, as many as 300,000 seafarers a month need international flights to enable the changeover of crews, according to IMO and the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD. Half of those have been stuck on ships, in some cases for 15 months, compared to the 11 months maximum, under the ILO's 2006 Maritime Labor Convention. The other half are waiting to embark and, as they only earn money at sea, are struggling to feed their families. Global maritime charity Stella Maris conducted a survey of the impact of COVID-19 on seafarers. The majority of the 363 respondents, mainly from the Philippines, said their most urgent need was to secure a new contract and return to work, while 69% said the pandemic has had a significant financial impact on them. They also said it had affected their emotional, mental and physical well-being. Added to stranded seafarers are the 70,000 cruise ship staff waiting to be sent home and crews on commercial fishing vessels which need to be changed. While the length of contracts vary, seafarers typically work between 4 and 6 months on ships, before a period of leave, according to the IMO. At sea, they work 7 days a week, for up to 12 hours a day, on tasks that need them to stay alert. Thousands of seafarers stranded on board ships have already expressed their exhaustion, fatigue, anxiety and mental stress, says the IMO. And a physically and mentally fatigued seafarer has a much higher risk of being involved in a marine casualty. Enough is enough. In March, the ILO called for seafarers to be given key or essential worker status, and to be exempted from travel restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. In May, a coalition of industry associations, including the ITF, the International Chamber of Shipping, ICS, and the Federation of National Associations of Shipbrokers and Agents, FONASBA, published its 12-step protocol, advising governments on how to facilitate ship crew changes during the pandemic. It was backed by the IMO and had input from the International Air Transport Association, IATA. Crew changes took place in 50 countries that month, according to the International Chamber of Shipping. The Netherlands, UK, Germany and Canada are among those who have waived visa restrictions, while Singapore completed its first crew change on 8 June. But the refusal of other countries to get on board was seen as putting lives and the supply system at risk, and after months of insufficient government action, the ITF drew a line in the sand, making 16 June the date after which workers could no longer be made to extend their contracts and stay at sea. The ITF has said enough is enough and is offering to help seafarers leave ships and return home, under the Maritime Labour Convention. The situation as it stands cannot continue, says Steve Cotton, the ITF's General Secretary. Most countries that have managed to contain the virus are now easing their restrictions, with the aim to restart economies. This very much depends on the goods ships and seafarers carry, but at the same time, they are unable to implement the necessary measures to facilitate crew changes. But if the crew disembark with no replacements, it also puts businesses at risk, notes Van Gogh. Those vessels can't sail and the entire supply system grinds to a halt in different trade routes. So we need a negotiated, well-brokered crew exchange solution. Charting a fairer course. Resolving the logjam requires a coordinated global response to tackle the twin challenges of ensuring workers are treated with the respect they deserve, while ensuring the supply system operates smoothly to drive the economic recovery from COVID-19. As Van Gogh says, this is the moment to take a hard look at whether we really do uphold human rights throughout global supply chains and can move forward together to achieve the Davos Manifesto's principles of stakeholder capitalism. On 25 June, the International Maritime Organization, IMO, will be marking the Day of the Seafarer by calling on all countries to officially designate seafarers as key workers and ensure crew changeovers can take place safely. It's an immediate response. We're not talking about opening countries up to travel and tourism, we're talking about a specific, easily identifiable group of people, who've made an immeasurable contribution to making this pandemic as bearable as it can be. And they've got to recognize this, says Jonathan Williams, General Manager at the Federation of National Associations of Shipbrokers and Agents. The airline industry is already on board to help get workers home, with talk of transport corridors and designated airports. IATA's Director General and CEO Alexander Dejuniak says, if governments identify airports that seafarers can use for crew changes and make appropriate adjustments to current health and immigration protocols, airlines can help keep global logistics moving. When shipping industry leaders come together in Geneva next week, they will urge governments to act quickly to waive visas for seafarers and arrange flights to get them home before the crisis deepens. The ITF has a 7-point list of requirements. The global community has to act responsibly as the seafarers and the industry have demonstrated throughout the crisis, says the ITF's Steve Cotton. Other leaders have also called for swift action. We cannot take these heroes of global trade for granted anymore. Seafarers do not represent a risk, their job keeps them in quarantine and socially distant, says the Secretary General of the ICS, Guy Platon. Government leaders must cut through the bureaucracy, lift the continuing imposition of travel restrictions on these key workers and focus on this issue now. The solutions do not need money, they do not need complicated negotiations, this is simple. Taking care of the people who move our goods and enable trade leads to job creation. This is central to securing lives and livelihoods, says Van Gogh. Cohesive global leadership from public, private and civil society leaders is necessary to solve this deepening crisis. Cohesive leadership is also vital for the Great Reset, enabling us to build back better. A sustainable global supply system is at the heart of this. Seamen and their right to choose for themselves. Not many people know about Poseidon principles, what do they imply, and what's all about, even people in shipping. Well, in short, this initiative is about climate change, It's about saving planet from this dreadful, efficient and cheap, sea transportation, by making merchant fleet inefficient, very costly, and therefore, eco-friendly. Another initiative named after ancient sea god, this time it's Neptune, emerged recently. Give a warm welcome to Neptune Declaration. What the hell is this one about? The Neptune Declaration identifies 4 main actions to facilitate crew change and keep global supply chains functioning, recognize seafarers as key workers and give them priority access to COVID-19 vaccines, establish and implement gold standard health protocols based on existing best practice, increase collaboration between ship operators and charterers to facilitate crew changes, and ensure air connectivity between key maritime hubs for seafarers. Obviously, concerned with shipping NGOs, forums, associations and the likes, are running short of ancient sea gods. By the way, Poseidon equals Neptune, same god in Greek and Roman mythology, so basically, Poseidon principles and Neptune Declaration are in a sense, synonyms. What gods are next, I wonder? Aphrodite Marine Green Love Accord? Zeus Digital Shipping Big Reset? Eros Sea Labor Gender Equality Ultimatum? What's the main problem with Neptune Initiative, propagated now by industry mainstream? It's as simple as it's exceptionally dangerous for seamen. Here's the essence of the whole idea. The only possible way in which we can inoculate the seafarers on the world shipping is that rather than dealing with the problem nationally, we all accept joint responsibility. After all, most of our ships are under other flags such as Barbados, the Virgin Islands, Panama and. This could be done by instituting a worldwide program by the flag states, to accept that seafarers are frontline workers for us all, and assume the responsibility for an inoculation program for those on the ships that enter their ports, regardless of nationality of the seafarer or the nationality of the ship. What does it mean if, when, implemented? It means that the whole crews will get the jab at ports of call of countries, which are already carrying out mass vaccinations. It means, practically, that nobody will be asking seamen knowing consent, let alone explaining to them, prior to jab, all pros and cons of COVID vaccines in general, and vaccine they are to get in given country, in particular. So, seamen in general will get all the variety of all existing vaccines from different producers, subject to something like lottery or roulette, country of ship's call, as the only criteria determining vaccine type and producer. The ship calls UK? They'll get the type of vaccine used for mass vaccinations in UK. The ship calls China? They'll get Chinese vaccines. And so on. What will happen to those seamen who suffer negative side effects, from mild to severe, when the ship is already at sea, days away from nearest available medical assistance? Any ideas, Neptune Declaration clowns? But it's not all. We're told, time and again, by all the mainstream starting from Bill Gates the savior, that new virus strains require new vaccines and new vaccinations, so that our foreseen future will be a chain of incessant vaccinations, from 2 to 5 and maybe more, annually. Seamen, therefore, will become walking, if they will be able to walk, that is, canisters of different vaccines cocktail, walking biohazard, full of poisonous stuff, brewed by big pharma criminals. All the do-gooders who are sucking shipping in ever-increasing numbers, are of course, touting their sick declarations as actions which will benefit seamen, by mitigating or tackling crew change crisis. First of all, it will be only a temporary relief from worldwide restrictions madness, several months at most. Then a new vaccine will come up, new virus strain, new pandemic wave requiring new mass vaccinations, as WHO/WEF. Gates repeatedly explained to us. Serfs, pandemic and vaccinations together with restrictions, are a long story. Some 10+ years. I believe, 1-2 years of non-stop vaccinations will be enough to ruin anyone's health, or to kill him. Don't forget, all this time, in this dreadful, dystopian new normal, seamen will be jabbed with a wide spectrum of all existing poisons, vaccines, that is, unlike people on land, residents of given countries, where they'll at least, get vaccines produced by the same producer. Most importantly, these seamen worldwide vaccinations are not goodness, are not benefit, are not a privilege, they are in their essence a violation of one of the most basic human rights given to us by God, the right to choose for ourselves what is good and what is bad for our bodies and health. While all sensible people all around the globe resist vaccinations and delay the jabs by all available means, seamen will be deprived of this option. They're treated like slaves, they're ordered to get the jab, by a bunch of elite criminals, and useful idiots, who always know better. I, again, strongly advise seamen, well, mostly of Eastern European nationalities, because of a number of reasons, to leave shipping for good, until the tide changes and this globalist black plague, called pandemic, Great Reset, Agenda 2021, etc., will collapse, like a sand castle or a house of cards. Collapse is inevitable, and for all I know, it will happen rather sooner than later. Ships' crews are pushed into worldwide vaccination chaos. International maritime organizations keep pushing the campaign for a worldwide seamen vaccination program, latest in row being Nautilus Federation, ITF and all the rest, that is to say, which rolled out a draft program. The Nautilus Federation has issued a statement calling on governments and global organizations to coordinate a worldwide vaccination program for seafarers and inland waterways transport crew. Any vaccinations authorized by the WHO must be recognized as valid for seafarer travel and transit through any national jurisdiction. Seafarers who have not yet been able to receive a vaccination must be permitted to travel to and from their country of domicile and their place of work without restriction, including via commercial aviation, for the duration of the global seafarer vaccination program. Nautilus Federation affiliates, in supporting this statement, recognizes that maritime and shipping professionals, the key workers who have kept global supply chains moving throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, will require an international solution to ensure they can access vaccines while they are at sea. The whole worldwide vaccination plan, drafted by maniacs and carried out by criminals, is predictably sliding into a chaos. There's a growing number of conflicts between different vaccine producers and different states or unions of states, between national and international regulations and authorizations, between interests of involved parties. All kinds of violent corruption are already underway and spreading like wildfire. What else can one expect from a satanic, rotten to the core, pandemic scheme? With that in mind, let's analyze Nautilus draft program, just on one example of Russian crews. In Russia, vaccination campaign is well underway, together with growing resistance and refusal of the population, the majority stubbornly refusing damn poison. Russia's official vaccine is Sputnik V, not yet authorized by the WHO and confronted by many of EU leaders. Besides monetary and political factors stoking this opposition, there's one more factor, probably the major one. Sputnik is strongly rumored to be much less harmful and dangerous than its big pharma counterparts. It does have adverse side effects, but still, it is not deadly, and wasn't intended to be deadly, if rumors are true. Russian seamen, those who are on shore, already begin to take the jab. Not all of them or majority of them, but already some, without any pressure or compulsion, willingly, are getting vaccinated. They take the jab, mainly, not because they are afraid of COVID or stupid enough not to know that all present vaccines, approved or not, don't give immunity, but simply because they want to get a green pass and put an end to their sign-on-off nightmares. But what they don't yet know is absolute uncertainty of obtaining of the green pass they yearn. It is already said that the Schengen area doesn't recognize Sputnik V as a valid, authorized vaccine, to grant a green pass to people coming to EU from third countries. What's the meaning of vaccination, then? In what situation will they find themselves when their ships call EU ports or ports of other countries which don't recognize Sputnik? Will they remain restricted in their movements as before, or will they be persuaded, forced, into vaccination by recognized vaccine, right there and then, by be vaccinated or else ultimatum? It is already said that a new vaccination is coming soon, this fall, actually. Bill Gates is speaking about regular 6 months vaccinations, or even monthly vaccinations. Does it mean that seamen on board of the ships will have to succumb to take a shot of whatever vaccine will be offered in this or that port of this or that country? Does it mean, de facto, that in 1-2 years they'll get a mixture of different vaccines from different producers, in different countries, without the slightest idea of how dangerous or deadly it might be? Medics don't have any idea in this respect, either, because everything is experimental and untested, from vaccines to long-term adversary effects, let alone mixture of different vaccines. Seamen are handicapped in their movements and actions in comparison with other groups of population. They can't avoid or delay, or refuse vaccinations, when pressed real hard. At least they should have a right to be vaccinated in their home country by the vaccines, produced by one and only producer. We're talking about multiply vaccinations, don't forget this vitally important fact. These pushed into us present ones are only the beginning of the long road to death, unless of course, we wake up and terminate the monsters, who started it all and keep it going. These present vaccines are killing mostly elders, this is already no secret, this is a fact which can't be hidden. Who are next in death row, what groups of people, on what basis? Age, race, sex, nationality? We don't know. Or will it be much more simple, just a mass murder, a genocide, to reduce global population to numbers which satisfy satanic globalist leaders? Here's what these so-called maritime organizations should do, be they in any way concerned about our dear seafarers. To demand a green pass to all and every seaman to, from their home countries, vaccinated or not, on condition, that they are to be vaccinated in their home country only, every time a new vaccine is rolled out. To ban an international solution to ensure seamen will be vaccinated while at sea, as too dangerous, with absolutely unpredictable health effects, or in other words, to ban the crew vaccinations in ports of call worldwide. Seamen should sign on off with just one vaccination certificate only, that of their home country. There's no meaning in addressing maritime organizations or pleading to them, they're far and long beyond the humanity boundaries, they're in parallel reality, in dark satanic zone, and that's especially true in case of trade unions. In Soviet Russia, incidentally, trade unions were always the first with most anti-working class, anti-human initiatives, like dogs in the hunt. It was and still is a good communist practice, to unleash trade unions to trumpet new atrocities. It's up to crewing agencies, to ship managing companies and to ship owners, they are still capable of doing something, to stop or slow down the oncoming disaster. After all, they are to pay for all the negative consequences, and by the way, they will be blamed and held responsible by guess whom? By maritime organizations and industry propaganda machine, media, of course, when things will go awry. Let's not forget that all the vaccine producers and all the official cabal, either national or international, are exempt from any liability for negative or deadly effects of the vaccination. They must keep in mind, also, all the negative effects they'll encounter if, when their crews suffer from chaotic vaccinations. They'll be deprived of their workforce, or at least, the best of it. And of course, it's up to seamen, they aren't children, they aren't our dear seafarers, they are fully responsible grown-up professionals and human beings, unlike say, trade unionists, who must make up their minds and decide for themselves. Stand up for your rights, and if you can't flatly refuse vaccinations, demand at least a bare minimum, a right to be vaccinated, now and later during all following vaccinations, in your own country only. It's your life, it's your health and it's the lives of your families, which depend on you. Don't put your life on a whim of roulette and a throw of dice, let alone the cares of concerned trade unionists, maritime organizations and NGO/charity scum. And finally, here's one more absolutely brilliant item of Nautilus program. An education program targeted towards seafarers should be created to counter the effects of anti-vaccination propaganda and disinformation. I strongly advise everybody to watch video given below. It's a mind-blowing video of a conference held by the WHO leading vaccination managers, medics and experts, in December 2019. Listen to what they say and discuss behind closed doors, because they didn't know that video records will later leak to media and become public. It's frightening, and it's humanly disgusting. They're discussing the safety of vaccines and vaccinations, and they say, one after another, that yes, modern vaccines are very unsafe and plainly dangerous, that yes, they don't know how dangerous they are and what are long-term effects, that yes, they have no idea how dangerous vaccines are for children, and that yes, there are no studies of these problems, and none are planned. What's their main problem? What's the main headache of a small group of those who command and manage worldwide vaccination programs? But of course, it's the problem of population doubting vaccine safety, and refusing to be vaccinated. That's the biggest problem. Listen to what these criminals say when they speak to public, in interviews, about absolute safety of vaccines and vaccinations. I want to ask all those MFKRs who are planning to counter anti-vax disinformation and propaganda, is this conference also anti-vax disinformation and propaganda? Do you understand that you're playing with humans' health and lives? Do you understand that sooner or later, but you'll pay for what you're doing now? The irony of it is, I grew up in anti-God society, under the dictatorship of atheism. I finally came to God. Those who grew up in presumably Christian countries, turned away from God and signed pact with devil, and are now busily fighting propaganda, or in normal language, the truth. Ship crew vaccination trends. 2 significant articles were published recently, one by Guard, another one by industry outlet, both revealing a true character of persons and companies, and attitude they adopted in the ongoing pandemic crime. Here's Guard opinion on PCR tests. To date, testing during the pandemic has mostly relied on the use of polymerase chain reaction, PCR, tests. This test method remains the gold standard for detecting the virus that causes COVID-19 and for diagnosing an active COVID-19 infection. PCR tests are generally very accurate. There are tons of materials saying and proving otherwise, that the PCR tests are unreliable and even more, weren't intended for pandemic test purposes, from the very invention of this test. Unreliability of PCR tests is recognized and acknowledged officially, on nations and international levels. Just one first-hand account. My son-in-law is an engineer in a medical company. He's setting and fixing Siemens medical diagnostic equipment. Company is based in Moscow and is embedded in Russian Ministry of Health, for obvious reasons. Half of his time he's spending on business trips around Russia, visiting major cities and their hospitals, installing, maintaining, literally, vitally important equipment. After one of such trips he was tested positive, and had to undergo 14-day quarantine. But next day, miracle. He has received a message from Moscow Disease Control Center, informing him that his test has been changed to negative. He wasn't alone. On that day, tens of thousands of people in Russia, who were tested positive, were informed by health authorities that their test results were changed to negative. As he later found out, his company, actually, Ministry of Health simply changed test technical regulations, and reduced the number of cycles to run the sample. PCR tests are notoriously unreliable and not objective, or in other words, they suit the purposes of the authorities. When government wants to create a panic, a second or third or new strain or whatever else, pandemic wave, tests are run on increased number of cycles, and that leads to an upsurge of positive tests. Absolutely healthy people are declared to be dangerous and contagious, against any science or common sense, or decency, or morals. Proactive testing with high number of cycles, be it made worldwide, will find the majority of world population positive tested. If Guard in its working practices, follows the same understanding of what gold standard is, as in its explanation and definition of PCR tests, then there isn't much left to say. Except probably, congratulating Guard clients on their excellent choice of services provider. Another article describes the pains and woes of ship owners, brought by cruise vaccinations problems. I strongly advise all concerned parties, including seamen, to read it through, and pay to it attention it deserves. Article is large and is full of legal terms and terminology, though actually, the meaning, the zest of this article, can be described in just 2 sentences. 1. How the shipowner can coerce his crews into vaccinations and not violate the laws. A decision of the Council of Europe was made on January 27, 2021, in which all authorities are ordered not to pressure or solicit people to take the corona vaccine in any way. 2. How the shipowner can avoid liability for any negative health effects caused by COVID vaccination. No words, no thoughts, no ideas, at all, with regards to our dear seafarers, and to risks they face if they succumb to pressure and get the vaccine shot, especially in light of surgeon-reported cases of deaths and severe side effects brought by vaccinations worldwide, and recent bombshell from one of world's leading vaccine developers, Mr. Geert van den Bosch. Bill Gates and WEF/UN want us all to change our diet, replacing natural products with artificial meat and meals based on insects. After I read article, I felt like I had eaten this new sustainable green meal, made from insects. The marine industry in Cyprus and the COVID-19 vaccine. As COVID-19 vaccines become more and more available, there are feelings of excitement and trepidation in equal measures. With people starting to receive the COVID-19 vaccines in Cyprus, many questions are being raised by employers and employees alike, particularly whether employers can force employees to be immunized. Likewise, similar issues arise from a marine perspective, with many shipowners asking if they can compel the seafarers to get vaccinated, and what they can do if seafarers refuse. Another highly disputable issue is also that of liability, more specifically as to who would bear liability if a seafarer finally takes the COVID-19 vaccine or not. The legal side: can a shipowner compel seafarers to take the COVID-19 vaccine? For the purposes of our review, the provisions of the Law of 2012, Maritime Labor Convention, 2006, ratification, and for matters connected therewith, the law, have been taken into consideration. The law has ratified the Maritime Labor Convention of 2006 as amended, the MLC, which provides for minimum safety standards and the rights of seafarers. The law, amongst others, provides for the minimum obligations on shipowners and seafarers in relation to seafarers' medical certificates and also for medical care on board ships and ashore. Nonetheless, no expressed provision for seafarers' vaccination is included. Looking into other pieces of national legislation, the Safety and Health at Work laws, the Safety at Work law requires employers to take reasonable steps to reduce workplace risks. Under the Safety at Work law, employees also have a duty to cooperate with their employer to reduce workplace risks. It would be a reasonable step, for the purpose of reducing the risk of COVID-19 in the workplace, for the employer to require employees to take the vaccine, as immunization of employees would likely allow for a return to normal in the workplace. If an employer carried out a risk assessment and concluded that having a vaccine is the most reasonably practicable way of controlling the risk of COVID-19, then, in theory, he could order the vaccination as a health and safety requirement. Nevertheless, at this point in time, no authority is granted to the shipowners as employers, under the Safety at Work law, to compel a seafarer to be vaccinated. Further, the Quarantine Law, Cap. 260, gives the government powers to impose measures through regulations and decrees to prevent, control or mitigate the spread of COVID-19 as a dangerous infectious disease. Nonetheless, no regulation or decree has made the vaccination mandatory until now. Most importantly, in accordance with the patient's protection rights as provided through European legislation, a patient has the right to refuse or to halt any sort of medical intervention, whilst the obligation would rest on the medical practitioner to explain any repercussions to the patient of refusing or halting such intervention. It follows from the above that no legislation is currently in force, compelling seafarers to get vaccinated. Implementing new policies. In the absence of legislation, a shipowner cannot force an employee to be vaccinated. However, shipowners may choose to follow a legitimate route by implementing policies or contractual provisions through employment agreements for the purposes of addressing this issue. This, for example, could be accomplished by making the COVID-19 vaccination a condition of an employment contract or by amending an existing employment contract. It is the case that many ship owners have made it a provision of an employment relationship for the seafarer to have certain vaccines which are obligatory in countries to which the vessel might sail. Looking into workplace policies, shipowners could also consider having in place strategies, procedures and policies concerning the COVID-19 vaccine. Notably, any workplace policy, including one that would mandate employees to receive the COVID-19 vaccination, shall be reasonably necessary and rationally connected to the workplace. For example, a mandatory vaccination policy could be deemed reasonably necessary if an employee is employed in the healthcare sector or is required to have frequent close contact with members of the public. In such a case, this requirement would be consistent with the employer's duty of care to provide a safe work environment. However, such a policy may not be considered by everyone reasonably necessary for the shipping sector, especially in cases where seafarers do not have immediate contact with the public and where sufficient safety precautions are in place. Given this, shipowners should not assume that a mandatory vaccination policy is going to be legal. As noted above, before implementing such vaccination policy, shipowners should carefully consider the circumstances of the particular ship, the level of exposure to individuals who are especially vulnerable or at risk. Also, before implementing such policy, shipowners must be mindful of potential human rights implications which could arise, as well as the impact it could have on a seafarer's privacy rights. Shipowners should carefully consider whether such a policy is truly necessary for their particular workplace and, if so, ensure that the policy takes all of these factors into account. The contractual route. Turning to contractual provisions, it is the case that, by practice, many seafarers' employment agreements include clauses which set as a condition for seafarers the acceptance of necessary vaccines for the countries their ship might enter. As far as the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned, being characterized as a dangerous infectious disease, the possibility of being considered as a necessary vaccination by the majority of the countries is high. This means that a seafarer could reasonably be required to get the COVID-19 vaccination where his existing contract includes such provision. The same may apply for new contracts. That is to say that should the COVID-19 vaccine fall within the necessary vaccination provision or should the employer reasonably include it specifically as a term of the new employment agreement, then this would mean that the seafarers would reasonably be obliged to be vaccinated. On the contrary, this could not easily be applicable with regard to existing contracts which do not include a vaccination provision. It is possible that any amendments to the employment relationship for this purpose might not be considered valid in cases where seafarers would not wish to be vaccinated, taking into consideration the provisions of the employment law and the applicable regime in Cyprus. Nonetheless, instead of obliging the seafarers to get vaccinated through a contractual provision or a mandatory vaccination policy, shipowners should, in any case, appropriately inform the seafarers in relation to the vaccine and encourage them to get vaccinated. In any case, though, if a mandatory policy is nonetheless necessary, shipowners should consider providing seafarers with a reasonable, non-disciplinary alternative to vaccination, such as allowing non-vaccinated seafarers to go on unpaid leave of absence when the risk of workplace transmission is particularly high. Further, for employees unable to be vaccinated for health reasons, disability, religion, or faith, shipowners might also be needed to provide appropriate accommodation and to ensure the protection of other crew members. Such measures might include providing for alternative duties, separate accommodation, where it is reasonably possible, and providing appropriate protective equipment. If such accommodation is not possible, or the vessel is unable to operate safely, an option for the shipowner would also be to remove from the vessel the non-vaccinated individual from the vessel, provided all contractual and other legal obligations to the individual are met. At present, it is difficult to say what the correct approach should be. Much will depend on the individual shipowners who will now have to consider all the above-mentioned factors in their risk assessment process. In any case, in deciding whether to mandate a COVID-19 vaccination for seafarers, a shipowner must balance the right to refusal to be vaccinated of seafarers against the health benefits associated with the vaccination requirement. In conclusion, It follows from the above that many issues are uncertain and yet to be decided.